Forward. Who is this guy and why should you listen to him? I am not who you expect. I am not a pundit, not a think tank analyst with a Georgetown degree and a publisher who wanted something provocative for the next election cycle. Not a cable news contributor who flies business class to explain working class problems to people juggling 2 jobs and a grocery bill that now looks like a car payment. I am a science teacher. In a high-need, high-risk career technical district in Northeast Ohio where every single student qualifies for free lunch, not most, not a majority, every single one. I have not had a student who did not qualify in years. I tell you that not for sympathy, but for context, because every word in this book was written by someone who sees the real-world consequences of failed policy in the faces of kids the system gave up on before I ever met them. 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. Before that, I was an Army combat medic for 23 years. I deployed to Iraq. While I was there, while people were actively trying to kill me, I helped open a school, a fire station, and a hospital. I personally escorted girls to class so they would not be murdered for wanting an education. I made decisions under fire I will carry for the rest of my life. The kind where the math works out perfectly and the outcome still replays at 2 inches in the morning in rooms that are supposed to feel safe. Before that, I was a paramedic in Cleveland. 12-hour overnight shifts, then straight to morning college classes, then back the next day. No gaps, no complaints. That was just what the goal required. I have published 2 science textbooks. I support a family of 6, 4 children, 1 extraordinary wife, 4 beehives, and a mortgage on a single teacher's salary. I use the Dave Ramsey envelope system. I feed all 6 of us restaurant quality meals for about $520 a month. I know what a budget is. I live inside one every single day. Which makes it particularly entertaining when people in Washington tell me they cannot find $975 million a year to stop the government from stealing retirement pay from combat wounded veterans. I am 100% service-connected, disabled, and medically retired. The government sends me a statement every year showing what I earned in retirement and then showing what I actually collect, which is 0. Because of the concurrent receipt offset, every dollar of VA disability compensation cancels a dollar of earned retirement pay, dollar for dollar, until nothing is left. I will tell you exactly what that means, who is blocking the fix, and what you can do about it in Chapter 8. I mention it in the first pages of this book so you understand from the start. None of this is abstract for me. None of it. Why did I write this book? Because I got tired of watching people I respect lose arguments they should win, not because they were wrong, but because the evidence was scattered everywhere and nobody had put it in one room. I got tired of watching the people I served with get fleeced by institutions they trusted with their lives. I got tired of watching my students get fed into a dependency machine that was specifically engineered to need them to fail, and then watching that same machine turn around and blame them for the failure it produced. And I got tired of watching Congress vote for a $924.7 billion defense bill the morning after declaring they could not afford $975 million a year to stop stealing retirement from combat wounded veterans, and then show up at Veterans Day ceremonies like nothing happened. I do not have the vocabulary for how much that particular hypocrisy offends me. I have tried. My entire career in uniform, in the field, at the whiteboard has been built on one operating principle. You do not decide the conclusion and then arrange the evidence around it. You start with the evidence and go where it leads. This book is where the evidence led me. It is not always comfortable. Some of what I found I genuinely was not looking for, but here it is. Every chapter of this book grew out of something I originally posted on X at AppySkyMike22802 in my articles, and inside a community called Bski's Classroom that has been reading along while I work through all of this. These are not white papers or committee reports. They are one man at a kitchen table in Northeast Ohio at midnight, after the kids are asleep and the beehives are quiet, running the numbers nobody else seemed to be running, and writing down what I found. If this book lands for you, if you find yourself forwarding a page at 11 p.m., please share it. Join Bski's Classroom on X, for the algorithm still does not like me. Ring the bell to get alerts when I post. Like and comment on every post you find useful. That is how the algorithm decides who else gets to see it. If you want to show your appreciation, please subscribe. A subscription is about the cost of a cup of coffee per month. I am not asking you to take my word for any of this. I am asking you to look at the evidence with me. Let's start. Chapter 1 is going to make you angry. That is appropriate. It should. But what do I know? I am only a medically retired Army combat medic, a 2 textbook author, a former Cleveland paramedic, and a father of 4 who cannot stop doing the math even when the math is infuriating. Chapter 1, the rigged count. How they broke representation before you ever cast a ballot. Here is the conclusion. I am putting it at the top. The political representation of the American Republic, your House seats, your Electoral College votes, Your share of $1.5 trillion in federal funding is being allocated based on a population count that the Census Bureau's own internal audit confirmed was wrong in 12 of 14 states. In 12 of those errors, it went the same direction. Republican-leaning states were undercounted, Democratic-leaning states were overcounted. Not sometimes, not half the time. 12 out of 14. Same direction. In my classroom, when a student's experimental results break consistently in one direction across 12 independent trials, I do not tell them the experiment was valid. I tell them they have a confounded variable. I send them back to find it. In science, a result that clean and that consistent in a single direction is not validation. It is a red flag. The Census Bureau apparently skipped that part of the scientific method. 2 states bucked the pattern. One undercounted state that leans Democratic. One overcounted state that leans Republican. In a legitimate random error scenario, you would expect the errors to split roughly evenly between red and blue. Instead, you got 12 moving in one direction and 2 moving in the other. Show me that result in a first-year statistics course, and the professor sends you back to check your methodology. 5 of the 6 undercounted states lean Republican. 7 of the 8 overcounted states lean Democratic. The Census Bureau's own post-enumeration survey, conducted by the Bureau itself, documented these errors. They are not disputed. They are on the record. And because of the 10-year apportionment cycle, they are legally locked in until 2030. The 2010 census found 0 statistically significant errors anywhere in the entire country. The 2020 census was off by 560,000 people in Texas alone. Nobody was fired. Nobody was prosecuted. The apportionment cannot be corrected for a decade. Let me walk you through the numbers. Then I want to show you something worse, a structural rigging of representation that happened in 1929 and has been quietly operating ever since, one that makes the census errors look like a rounding problem. The 2020 census, the most conveniently skewed audit in American history. Article 1, Section 2 of the United States Constitution requires an actual enumeration of the population every 10 years. Not an estimate, not a statistical approximation with noise added. An actual count. The purpose is explicit: to apportion representatives and direct taxes according to real population. The founders were not ambiguous about this. The 2020 census failed that standard. Not through allegation or inference, through the Bureau's own post-enumeration survey, which is the internal audit they conduct after every census to measure accuracy. Here is what the numbers actually say. States that were undercounted representation taken from them. Florida was undercounted by approximately 750,000 people. Florida needed only 171,500 additional counted residents to gain a congressional seat under the current 435 seat system. The Bureau shortchanged them by more than 4 times the required margin. They were denied 2 seats they had earned. Texas was undercounted by approximately 560,000 people. Texas needed 189,000 more counted residents to gain 1 seat. They were shorted by nearly triple the margin. Tennessee, undercounted by approximately 330,000. Arkansas, approximately 152,000. Mississippi, approximately 122,000. 5 states, all Republican-leaning, all undercounted. Combined, the shortfall in Republican-leaning states approaches 2.2 million people erased from the count used to allocate congressional seats, electoral college votes, and a decade of federal funding. States that were overcounted seats handed to them. New York was overcounted by approximately 695,000 phantom people. People who were apparently enumerated and used to justify keeping or gaining congressional representation, but who were not actually there. 695,000. In one state, Minnesota was overcounted by approximately 219,000. Here is the detail that makes Minnesota the most instructive example in the dataset. Minnesota would have lost a congressional seat if just 26 fewer people had been counted. 26. I have more students than that in a single class period. 1 school bus worth of phantom people saved an entire congressional seat. Massachusetts, overcounted by approximately 157,000. Rhode Island, approximately 55,000. Rhode Island would have lost its sole remaining congressional seat if 19,000 fewer people had been counted. The state's own Common Cause director described it as Rhode Island being essentially the beneficiary of a statistical anomaly. That is the polite version of, you kept a seat you had no business keeping. Ohio was overcounted by approximately 176,000. Hawaii by approximately 99,000. Delaware by approximately 54,000. 7 of the 8 overcounted states lean Democratic. Colorado received a brand new congressional seat it had no right to. Someone is sitting in that seat right now, drawing a federal paycheck, casting votes on your healthcare and your taxes and your military because the Bureau's count went wrong in one direction 12 times out of 12. You will sometimes hear the damage summarized as 6 stolen seats. That number is accurate, and it is the most misleading accurate number you have ever been handed. It measures the fraud against a house that is already grotesquely compressed. I will show you shortly what the founders' math says the number actually is. It is not 6, the $1.5 trillion that followed the wrong numbers. Congressional seats are not the only thing allocated by the census. Approximately $1.5 trillion in federal funding is distributed to states over each decade based in part on census population counts. Education, healthcare, infrastructure, housing assistance, all of it flows from the same headcounts the Bureau's own audit confirmed were wrong. Here's what $1.5 trillion actually looks like. Stack $1 bills, and the pile reaches approximately 102,000 miles, 408 times taller than Everest, nearly halfway to the moon. Laid end to end, those bills circle the Earth's equator 5,884 times. Per taxpayer, $1.5 trillion adds roughly $18,750 to what we each owe on the national debt. That is not money going to taxpayers. That is money being spent in their name, allocated based on a count that was wrong. Based on the directional errors in the 2020 census, Republican-leaning states are projected to lose approximately $90 billion in federal funding over this decade. Democratic-leaning states are projected to gain approximately $57 billion. That is a $147 billion swing out of red state communities and into blue ones, based entirely on a population count the Bureau's own surveyors documented as incorrect. Texas gets less money than it is owed. Florida too. Tennessee, Arkansas, Mississippi, less. Minnesota, New York, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, more. Based on people who either were not there or who, as we will discuss, should not have been counted toward apportionment in the first place. And every federal agency uses the official census figures rather than the corrected post-enumeration numbers. The errors are locked in for the full 10-year cycle. That is not a glitch. That is policy. The algorithm. They do not want you to audit. Here's where it goes from catastrophically wrong to deliberately obscured. In 2020, the Census Bureau quietly introduced something called differential privacy. The official justification was protecting individual privacy in data releases. The theoretical argument has some merit. The implementation was another story entirely. Differential privacy is an algorithm that deliberately injects false data into census results below the state level all the way down to individual city blocks. That is not a bug. That was the stated design. Controlled noise, added on purpose. The problem is that Article 1, Section 2 requires actual enumeration, not a statistical approximation. The Supreme Court addressed precisely this question in Department of Commerce versus U.S. House of Representatives in 1999 and said clearly, statistical sampling cannot be used for apportionment. The Bureau's response in 2020 was essentially, fine, we will not call it sampling. We will call it differential privacy. Same outcome. New label? Harvard data scientists found the algorithm artificially reduces racial and partisan diversity and makes it impossible to follow the principle of one person, one vote. The Mexican-American Legal Defense and Education Fund, not a conservative organization, stated the resulting data was too inaccurate to satisfy the Voting Rights Act. Civil rights groups were raising serious concerns. The national press was largely not paying attention. The most critical detail, the amount of statistical distortion the algorithm introduced, is classified. A handful of Bureau officials know the unaltered numbers. Nobody outside that cleared circle does. When local governments try to challenge their population counts through the normal correction process, they literally could not determine whether a number was wrong because of a genuine error or because a bureaucrat had intentionally altered it. The error correction mechanism was neutralized on purpose. The man who designed the system was John Aboud, the Bureau's chief scientist and a documented Democratic donor. He led the internal opposition to adding a citizenship question to the 2020 census, arguing there was not enough time to implement it. Then he found sufficient time to design and deploy an entirely new classified statistical methodology that makes it impossible to identify where non-citizens live at the sub-county level. No time for a citizenship question. Plenty of time for an opacity machine. Quinn's Law Hash 2 operates here with surgical precision. If you want to know what the left is doing, watch what they accuse conservatives of doing. They called anyone who questioned census accuracy a conspiracy theorist, while they were running a classified algorithm whose distortion parameters nobody is allowed to examine. I was a combat medic. I have coordinated multi-element operations in hostile environments. When I see a sequence of decisions, citizenship question blocked, algorithm deployed, parameters classified, error correction neutralized, results certified, I do not call that a coincidence. I call that a coordinated maneuver. And then there are the people who should not have counted at all. The Census Bureau counts every person on American soil on Census Day. Citizens, legal residents, people who entered without authorization. All of them count equally toward congressional apportionment. You read that correctly. Research suggests between 10 and 12 current House seats represent illegal alien populations rather than citizens. Think about what that means for your vote. 2 congressional districts, side by side. District A, 730,000 citizens and 30,000 illegal aliens. District B, 760,000 citizens, and no illegal aliens. Both get one representative. But the citizens in District A are numerically diluted by 30,000 people who cannot legally cast a ballot, which means their individual votes carry less weight per citizen than those in the neighboring district. Your vote is worth less because someone else's district imported non-voters who still count towards seats. James Madison warned about exactly this kind of structural manipulation in Federalist Number 10. He was concerned about factions using procedural mechanisms to distort representation. He just did not anticipate that the mechanism would be a census form and a sanctuary city ordinance operating in tandem. Ask yourself why the Democratic Party has fought the citizenship question on every census for 2 decades. Every uncounted illegal alien in a sanctuary city is a fraction of a congressional seat and a slice of $1.5 trillion in federal funding. This is not immigration policy in isolation. This is election strategy wearing a census form. They have done this before. This argument that non-citizens should count toward congressional apportionment is not a new Democratic invention. It is a recycled playbook, and one that goes back to the Constitutional Convention of 1787 and the ugliest chapter in American political history. During the convention, the southern slave states demanded that every enslaved person be counted as a full person for the purpose of congressional representation. Not because they believed in the humanity of the people they were brutalizing. Those same enslaved people had 0 rights, 0 votes, and 0 legal standing. The slave states wanted full counting for one reason: more House seats, more electoral college votes, more structural power to protect and expand the institution of slavery. The northern free states, the ones already moving toward abolition, wanted enslaved people counted as 0. They understood exactly what the slave states were attempting. They recognized the power grab for what it was, using the bodies of the people they oppressed to multiply their own political influence in Congress. If the South could count every enslaved man, woman, and child as a full person for apportionment, while those same people had no rights, no votes, and no legal protection, then the masters were using human suffering as a ballot multiplier. The 3/5 compromise was a limitation on that power grab, not a moral declaration about the worth of a human being. The abolitionists never believed that, and neither did the framers who pushed back. It was a structural reduction in what the slave states were demanding. 3/5 instead of 5/5. The North lost the argument for 0, but did not lose it all the way. And because they did not lose it all the way, Southern domination of the House and the Electoral College was constrained enough that Abraham Lincoln's election and the abolition that followed became mathematically possible. The pattern is identical to what you are watching right now. Count people who cannot vote, enslaved in 1787, undocumented in 2024, and the counting party gains congressional seats and electoral college votes they did not earn from actual voters. In 1787, the beneficiary was the Southern planter class. Today, the beneficiary is the party that has blocked a citizenship question on the census at every opportunity for 3 decades. The mechanism is the same. The incentive is the same. The only thing that has changed is the century, the deeper rigging, the 1929 Act nobody is talking about. I need to take you back to 1787. Because the census fraud, as bad as it is not the foundational problem. The foundational problem is something Congress did in 1929, and it has been quietly operating ever since. If you only walk away from this chapter with one thing, let it be this section. George Washington sat through the entire Constitutional Convention in near total silence. He was the presiding officer. He spoke almost never. In the entire summer of 1787, he made exactly one substantive motion on the floor of the convention. He argued for dropping the representation ratio from 1 congressman per 40,000 citizens to 1 per 30,000. The convention passed it unanimously. No debate, every delegate agreed. Why? Because Madison had spent weeks making the case in Federalist No. 56, that House members required intimate knowledge of their local communities and immediate dependence on and intimate sympathy with the people. The ratio was not a technical detail. It was the moral architecture of the chamber. A representative needed to know his constituents, their businesses, their children, their worries, their faces. The founders assumed the House would grow alongside the population forever. As America expanded, representation would expand with it. The bond between citizen and representative would remain human scale. Then in 1929, Congress passed the Permanent Apportionment Act and froze the House at 435 members. Not because the Constitution required it, not because the founders envisioned it, because the people already in office did not want to share power with anyone new. That is the entire explanation. Career politicians, protecting career politicians in 1929 at the expense of every American who would come after them. At Washington's ratio of 130,000, today's House of Representatives should have 11,167 members. Your representative would speak for your town. Instead, your representative speaks for 770,000 strangers. That is 25.6 times less representation than George Washington personally demanded as his only contribution to the Constitutional Convention. Let me give you the full math. because this is the part that does not get said out loud. At Washington's ratio of 130,000 and today's population of approximately 335 million Americans, the House should have 11,167 members. The Electoral College would have 11,270 votes. Your representative would know 30,000 neighbors, your specific community, your specific problems, your specific face. Instead, your representative speaks for roughly 770,000 people. That is 25.6 times less representation than George Washington demanded as his one contribution to the entire Constitutional Convention. Let that number sit. George Washington sat through an entire summer of debate and spoke once. What he spoke about was how close your representative needed to be to you, and 1,929 made sure his answer became irrelevant. Alexander Hamilton celebrated legislative balances and checks in Federalist No. 9 as essential safeguards against tyranny, not just from kings, but from concentrated power of any kind. The small district model was a structural check on faction. Madison warned in Federalist No. 10 that democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, precisely because direct majority rule, without the filtering mechanism of genuine local representation, becomes mob governance. He explicitly distinguished between a pure democracy, where citizens act directly, and a republic, where they act through representatives close enough to the community to translate local interest into national policy. Compress 335 million people into 435 seats, and that filtering mechanism fails. Individual accountability becomes impossible. Your representative does not know your name, and you can miscount hundreds of thousands of people without anyone noticing because the denominator is already so large that errors of that magnitude disappear into the noise. That is not a side effect of the 1929 Act. That is a feature. Quinn's Law has honed. Liberalism always generates the exact opposite of its stated intent. A government designed to represent the people was restructured by an act of Congress to insulate the people in office from the people who put them there. Here's the number the 6 stolen seats framing is designed to prevent you from calculating. At the ratio, Washington actually fought for 130,000. The directional errors in the 2020 census represent not 6 shifted seats, but 123. 123. In the republic Madison described in Federalist No. 10, a structural shift of 123 seats is not a clerical error. It is a constitutional crisis. The fact that it reads as 6 in our compressed system is a math trick, not a reassurance. The people who made that 1,929 decision are gone. The decision has outlasted all of them. And it will outlast us, too. Unless someone is willing to say out loud what George Washington already said in 1787. That 30,000 is the minimum, not a target to aspire to. Birthright citizenship. The lie that was never settled law. Most Americans were taught a simple rule. Born in the United States. Automatic citizen. No conditions, no exceptions. Settled. It is not settled. It was never settled. And the men who wrote the amendment everyone quotes in this argument said on the record in 1866 that it does not mean what people believe it means. The 14th Amendment Citizenship Clause. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. 2 conditions, not 1. The second condition is not decoration. Chief Justice Marshall established in Marbury v. Madison in 1803 that every word in the Constitution carries meaning. No clause is waste. Senator Jacob Howard introduced the Citizenship Clause to the Senate. He was its author. His own words explaining what subject to the jurisdiction thereof means. This will not, of course, include persons born in the United States who are foreigners, who are aliens, who belong to the families of ambassadors or foreign ministers. Senator Lyman Trumbull, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, not owing allegiance to anybody else. That is what it means. Here's the argument that ends this debate if people would actually look at it. Native Americans, born on this continent for thousands of years before the first European arrived. Were they citizens under the 14th Amendment? No. The Supreme Court said so explicitly in Elk v. Wilkins in 1884. Native Americans owed allegiance to their tribes, not exclusively to the United States, and therefore were not subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Criminal law applied to them. Full political allegiance was required for citizenship. How did Native Americans become citizens? Congress had to pass the Indian Citizenship Act in 1924, 56 years after the 14th Amendment was ratified. If birthright applied to everyone born on American soil, regardless of allegiance, that act would have been completely unnecessary. The fact that Congress passed it is proof. The 1,898 Supreme Court case, United States v. Wong Kim Ark, cited by everyone who insists this is settled, concerned the child of Chinese nationals who were permanent legal residents with established domicile in San Francisco, not tourists. not visa holders. The word domicile appears more than 20 times in that opinion. The court was extremely specific about what it was deciding. It was deciding a question about the children of permanently domiciled lawful residents. It was never asked whether the child of someone who crossed the border last Tuesday is an automatic citizen. It has never ruled on that question. I wrote a complete legal breakdown of this issue with full citations, every relevant Supreme Court case, the complete 1,866 congressional debates in a separate article at bschemike22802 on X. If you want the deep dive, it is there. What matters for this chapter is structural. Millions of people are being counted in our census toward congressional apportionment based on a citizenship assumption that was never established by law, only by administrative practice, that nobody has been willing to challenge. The Supreme Court's April 2026 ruling, limiting nationwide injunctions by activist district court judges, clears the runway for the citizenship clause question to finally reach the merits at the highest level. That reckoning is overdue. What needs to happen? A good lesson does not end at "here is the problem." It ends at "here is a testable solution." So, first, Congress needs to authorize a full republication of the 2020 census using raw, pre-algorithm data with traditional privacy protections. Traditional privacy protections worked for 200 years before 2020. They did not require replacement with a classified algorithm whose distortion parameters nobody outside a cleared handful is allowed to examine. Second, differential privacy must be permanently prohibited from any census product used for apportionment, redistricting, or federal funding allocation. Use it for internal research, clearly labeled unofficial. The moment those numbers touch law, policy, or dollars, they must be auditable by the public they affect. Third, the Citizenship Data Program needs to restart using administrative records already in the possession of federal agencies. The IRS knows who has filed taxes. The Social Security Administration knows who has a number. The Department of Defense knows who has served. We have the records. We have chosen not to use them because certain people benefit from not using them. Fourth, and this is the one Congress will resist most vigorously for reasons that are not complicated, the 435 seat cap requires a national conversation. The Permanent Apportionment Act of 1929 was a political choice, not a constitutional requirement. It can be changed. At Washington's ratio, the 2020 census fraud was not 6 stolen seats. It was 123. Those two numbers describe different crimes and deserve different conversations. The House of Representatives was designed to be the chamber closest to the people, the most responsive, the most accountable. At 770,000 strangers per member, what we have is not representation. It is franchise management. Franchise managers serve the franchise. Your representative should serve you. Right now, George Washington would not recognize what we have built. He would recognize that what he fought against representation so diluted it loses its accountability is exactly what we have. A note before chapter 2. Everything in this chapter happens before you walk into a polling place. The seats are already wrong. The funding is already misdirected. The representation is already diluted to a ratio George Washington would have called unacceptable. All of that is structural, baked into the census, baked into the 1929 Act, baked into a citizenship assumption nobody in Congress wants to examine. Chapter 2 picks up at the ballot box itself. The FBI affidavit from Fulton County, Georgia. The SAVE Act, and Senator Padilla's promise to die on a hill to stop citizenship verification for voter registration. The Minnesota Secretary of State, who redefined the master list the day after a Republican legislator asked to see it. The voter rolls listing active registered voters at parks, bus stations, and abandoned buildings. That is the next layer. This is a 2-level problem. Chapter 1 is the structural rigging. Chapter 2 is the electoral rigging. Together, they form exactly the kind of attack on representative government that Madison spent his career designing safeguards against, and that those safeguards were never built to defend against, because the safeguards assumed good faith actors maintaining the system. We no longer have that assumption available. If this chapter made you angry, good. That is the appropriate response to what the data says. Please share this, post it, tag someone who needs to read it. Every share pushes this in front of people who would never find it otherwise, and the algorithm rewards engagement, which means likes and comments matter as much as shares. If you find value in this work, join BSKI's classroom on X communities. Make sure to ring the bell on my profile to get notified of a new post, for the algorithm does not like me. Also, please subscribe. It is about the cost of a cup of coffee per month, and it is how this research keeps getting written. But what do I know? I am only a medically retired Army combat medic from Northeast Ohio who sat down one night and ran the numbers the way the founders would have run them, using the Census Bureau's own published data, the congressional record from 1,866 and the Federalist Papers that apparently nobody in Washington has cracked open since law school. What came out of that math was not 6 stolen seats and a budget rounding error. It was the blueprint for hollowing out a constitutional republic while everyone was busy arguing about the curtains.